So, wasn't it Jesus who suggested that a house that was built on sand was not a good idea because it would be swept away because it had no foundations? I suppose if in modern times he'd been telling the same, he'd have said perhaps the person who tried to build a factory on tundra because global warming would melt the ice soil beneath it and away it would go. So perhaps it's the gospel for today, which needs a bit of building on something solid, because, well, just listen to it. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. And then also comes the words, I came not to send peace but a sword. And all that followed by a verse on family conflict or family breakdown even. These are very radical things and have been much disputed about. So brilliant. That's just what we need in an era of angry words where we're all being trained to be skillful in being able to beat down the other person with our words and to shame them and do it in public. And so it's a pity that we have a bit of the gospel which is very hard and people will take amiss, and it's called a hard saying. Never mind. My money is on at least one church in the area who will be not quoting the entire gospel for today because it contains this difficult passage, or maybe some who might have changed the reading altogether. I wonder how much my bet would pay off. Never mind. Our ancient ecclesiastical parish of St Mary with St George at Hornsey, they won't do a thing like that. We're warts and all. So we have to look at what choices we have with this. And just before this reading, there comes the dispatch of the 70. They're sent out with sandals and no money and all the rest of it to bring about the coming of the kingdom. And it has an apocalyptic ring. And of course, Albert Schweitzer thought, this really all was a period of time where Jesus was very taken with the coming of the kingdom. And he suggests that actually he never quite lost this view. You could go with that, or else at the same time you could say perhaps Jesus did for a time have a mind that the kingdom was going to come in such a way as it would take away everything and change it radically, and so people would be suffering the effects of such a radical incoming. I don't take this view and take the view that Jesus, like us, over a lifetime, changed his mind, that it was possible to do this. Well, that's one possibility. Another is that the reporter of the Gospel of Matthew had a vested interest in making things conflict-ridden. And, there are some people who actually like stirring up conflict and are not happy unless there's actually violent conflict being perpetrated in some way. And we know from annals of psychiatry that sometimes this need for violence holds the person together. It's part of their makeup and their psychological health to have something of an enemy all the time. And we hear a little bit about this psychologically at Easter, enemies where there aren't really any enemies, but they get created nonetheless to keep up the status quo. So that's another possibility, that the reporting of this was actually done in a little bit of a wild way. And well, there's also something else. You've got to look at the context. And so you think, well, now, this gospel, Jesus was talking to his disciples. And so maybe there's something in that. Now, it does transpire, apparently, that the talk of the Messianic kingdom in Jewish thought at the time did contain the idea that it was a peaceful coming, that the Prince of Peace would come to reign, and that all would be golden and wonderful. And it could just be that Jesus is saying to his disciples, and this was for his disciples' ears, look out, chaps, this is not how it's going to be. There's going to be a lot of dissension. This is going to bring effects that are going to be divisive at times, and you better get used to it. So I suppose you could go and sort of combine all three, if you like, to come up with more solid, dependable view. And it's this, that where you get a saying or a hard saying in a gospel, you have to look at the context and be able to discern what may possibly have been going on. There are many elements here that are difficult, but nonetheless, there are some things that make sense when you look at it in the context. And our job is really to explain this to people and also to work on it ourselves. It's an interesting gospel in a sense. It's actually very poetic. It carries poetic lines. I'll read some of them to you. And there's something of the style of the Beatitudes, of the Sermon on the Mount, and I call it a double bounce. It's actually a style that occurs in the Gospel of Thomas, which didn't get for publication you've only got 4 Gospels. The Gospel of Thomas, written later, still had a sense of wisdom, poetic wisdom, a lot of wise sayings in it. And this passage in Matthew has just the same. Listen to some of these. Let me just see if I can find them here and read them. There's nothing covered up that will not be uncovered. What I say to you in the dark, you must shout from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Do not bring peace, but a sword, and so on. But there's one for today in this gospel there that I think would tackle the issue that I think has been raised in the news, and you and I may have been thinking about. Statues. And maybe in all the political debate, we'd all be taking different sides. I'm afraid that's what we do as people. We have to look for the spiritual message. And part of it is here in this gospel and in this saying. And it alludes to the idea, I think, found, of course, elsewhere in the Gospels and in the whole context of Jesus' ministry, that we're not all perfect. We're part of the human condition is that we're not. Let me remind you of that wonderful narrative where Jesus is confronted by some of the Pharisees, and they bring to him a woman taken in adultery, and they say, hey, listen, she's been caught in the act. She should be stoned. What do you say? And he says nothing. And then, and it's brilliant, he stoops and he draws in the sand. And then he answers and says, listen, is there one of you who hasn't done anything wrong? Yes, well, if there is, you be the first one to cast the stone. And what happens? You remember it. They all go away, one by one. And so it is that the issue of the statues is that there's nothing covered up that won't be uncovered. It's too bad. It's painful, but it's healthy. And the message for us, I don't know that helps us decide what we're actually going to do with the statues, but it does say we can educate ourselves about the good and the bad in all these figures that have shaped our history. But also, we have to bear in mind the good and the bad shape our own history. And we would do well to remember that the things I cover up will not always be covered up. You're not going to see the whole me, but I have to live with the possibility that God can actually uncover me, and they will in the fullness of time be uncovered. And that there, with these unfortunate statues there, but for the grace of God, go I. Thank you.